Hey guys, what's up? This is Daniel, and I'm going to tell you guys why I think Family Guy sucks now. Now, I think the last amazing season of Family Guy was season 3. I think seasons 1 through 3 were all really, really good and amazing. Like, my favorite comedy. I think season 4 kind of started to go downhill, but I still think it was a good show. I think anything after that, or most episodes after that, there's always, exceptions here and there, but the majority of episodes after that just haven't been up to par at all. Now, I think the very first episode where I started to feel like something was a little bit off was probably mid-season 4, around the episode Petarded. I actually thought that was a really funny episode and whatnot, but I don't know, I just feel like that was around the time that something started to feel a little bit off. It was still a really good show, like I said, in season 4, in my opinion, but I think the first thing I want to touch upon here is cutaways. There's a lot of problems I have with the show now, but I think cutaways was the main thing that season 4 did that kind of started dragging the show downhill. They started relying on cutaways way too much, taking away from the overall feel and plot line of an episode. And I also feel like that it's a really dumb cop-out, in place of actual good humor, to put a cutaway in there. And I'm not saying, obviously, the old Family Guy episodes, like in seasons 1 through 3, did have cutaways, and there was maybe 4 cutaways per episode usually at most, maybe a little bit more sometimes, but I'm going to talk about what I think is the proper way to lead in and out of a cutaway that I personally don't feel like breaks the episode flow. Firstly, I'm going to touch upon, I think the first episode that I really started to notice that there was way too many cutaways in season 4 was probably the episode Jungle Love. I think this episode was very, very hit and miss, and the only misses about the episode, in my opinion, were the cutaways, actually. And it just seemed like half the episode was classic, and the other half was just like cutaways that they threw in there. And I just think it would have been a lot better of an episode if they didn't rely so much on the cutaway aspect. And now to touch upon what I think is a proper way to lead in and out of a cutaway. Okay, I really wanted to use clips from the actual show to show you guys, because it's a lot more entertaining and whatnot, but unfortunately I think Fox would probably make a hit against my account due to copyright infringement, and have actually gotten my account taken down once in the past for actually one of my own animations because of Fox, so I'm not even going to risk doing that. But anyway, so I'll just go ahead and kind of just say the parts of the episode that I think should have been improved upon. For instance, there's just skimming through the episode, the first cutaway I came across that really bothered me, and this is just skimming through it, is when Peter says, just as entertaining as the time I saw Paul Reiser do stand-up. I'm not sure if that was the exact line, but that has nothing to do with the plot. It's like no one in real life says that. No one says, oh, that was just as entertaining as this other time, and then relays it to something that has nothing to do with the current situation. I mean, maybe there's some freaks out there that do that, but I don't know. But I'm just trying to say that, personally, I think Family Guy in its first 3 seasons had this dynamic of realism to it, that I think that, I don't know, the characters just felt really real, and you felt like a lot of the things they were saying, whether or not it was very loony and toony or whatever, a lot of things they were saying were very, very realistic, and it made you feel for the characters more. But when a character just breaks out and says something totally random like that, it just breaks away from the overall plot and feeling of the episode and the character, in my opinion. I just think that that's bad character development and a really bad excuse to put a joke in there. And whether or not the cutaway they lead into is even funny, I think that that's kind of even irrelevant. Obviously, it's better the cutaway is funny than it's not, but still, I just don't think a cutaway should be led into in that fashion. Here's some more examples. So later on in the episode, there's another cutaway where Stewie says, oh, them and their squabble, why suppose they're not the first couple to have problems? And then it goes to the whole caveman joke where she finds the cave paintings in the, cave closet or whatever, and I think that was a little pushing it, but I think that that's an okay way to lead into a cutaway, as long as you don't overdo it, because, he's actually kind of relaying it to something that's going on in the plot, so it doesn't feel as forced. So I'm just kind of giving you guys perspective on my opinion on how I think, it's okay to lead into a cutaway or whatever. Obviously, this is subjective, but you guys get it. Well, skimming through the episode more, I found another cutaway that I thought was led into the wrong way. People do crazy things when they're confused, like the time that my agent dropped that bomb on me, or whatever, and then it cuts away. But it's just like, just no one would say that. I just don't like the way that's led into, and I just feel like it's totally veering off when they could have just put something more relevant to the plot in its place. So going through the episode more, there was also, this is worse than being Kevin Federline's magic mirror. And there was, this is bigger news than when I toured Europe with my musical rendition of My Left Foot. Okay, neither of those things have anything to do with the plotline once again, and they're just them leading into something completely blindly that has nothing to do with it. I just kind of feel like that this is a problem that has plagued the series ever since around mid-season 4, or even earlier on in season 4. I feel like it was a little bit less bad earlier on in season 4, but I just think that they should just ditch that style of leading into a cutaway. Like, it's okay to go into a cutaway, but just don't do it in a fashion that makes you feel like you're not even watching the episode you're watching, or whatever. And that's kind of, I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one that just goes, ugh, when they watch Family Guy and they lead into a cutaway. Like, I've talked to numerous people that are, feel the same way, so I think that that's something that it just blows me away that they haven't improved upon that, like, 10 seasons later or whatever. So, anyways, that's my take on the cutaways, but if that was the only problem with the show, then I would still be a pretty big fan, but there's other problems, and I'm about to get into those. The next issue Family Guy has that I'd like to touch upon, and once again, this is my opinion, is character development. I just feel like the characters are very shallow now. They're almost just like shadows of their former selves. I feel like a lot of the things that made them funny are just exaggerated to the point now where it's not even funny anymore. For instance, I guess I'll touch upon, let's say, Stewie first. He's the most, I kind of feel like, obvious one at face value. He used to be evil and not so gay, for instance, and now, I just feel like a vast majority of the jokes with Stewie now are gay jokes. And, Stewie was a little bit on the gay side in season 3, and even before that I think he showed some signs of being gay, but I think season 3 had that good balance of, he was like a little bit gay and it was funny, but he was mostly still evil. And I feel like that was just like kind of a development on the character, but now he's just so gay all the time that he's just very shallow, and there's just not much depth there. So I kind of feel like that's the main problem with Stewie, and I feel like now when he's evil, it's in more of like almost like a gangster way, and not so much of like, oh, I'm going to use my inventions to do this or that or kill Lois or whatever. It's more like, oh, he takes out a gun and pops a cap in someone's ass or something. I feel like that's kind of how Stewie is now. And I mean, that can be funny too and whatever, but it's just kind of like, it just more, relies upon, violence and whatever. But I'll touch upon Brian next. I feel like Brian used to be kind of more the voice of reason and whatever, and now he's like becoming a little bit more crazy like the rest of the family. And now he's just totally up his ass with politics. And I think I've heard people say that they think Seth is kind of expressing too much of his own views through Brian. I think there might be, some truth to that. But I just feel like, Brian used to kind of just be, just the very logical one that kind of sat back and just kind of said, okay, this is what's going on here. Like, you need to do this, Peter. Or like, maybe this would be a better idea or whatever. But now he's just kind of like, seems like he hangs out with Stewie most of the time. And I think that they probably do that because in Road to Rhode Island, people love the chemistry between Stewie and Brian being kind of like paired up. And that chemistry does work really well. But I do kind of miss when Brian and Peter used to go and do things together. I think some of the funniest episodes had them doing things together, because it's kind of like the man's best friend aspect is like where I think Brian was kind of rooted. So I think they should stick to that a little bit more too. But anyway, that's my main complaint about Brian. I'll get more into the voice acting later, but I'm going to touch upon, I think even Brian's voice has kind of changed. Like, back in the old episodes, he had this just kind of like, oh, okay, Peter, I'll help you with this, or whatever. But now he just kind of talks, he sounds almost just like Seth, but Seth used to give him kind of a deeper tone that added to, like, kind of his sophisticated character before, and now that's kind of absent also. So, I don't know, that's my complaint about Brian. Next, let's see, I'll touch upon Lois. I think they've gotten a little bit better with this recently, but there was, actually in the commentary of the episode, Breaking Out is Hard to Do, I believe, Seth said he was always worried about Lois getting too crazy. because Lois is kind of the backbone of the Griffin family, kind of in a similar way to Brian. She's part of what made that family feel really real, because she was like a real mom that cared about her kids. But now she had like a crazy streak before, but that was funny because they just do it occasionally, like in the Christmas episode. She freaked out, like no paper towels or whatever, like stuff like that. And that was funny because it showed it was kind of realistic, because I think, like, you know, a lot of people's moms, they kind of have that like sudden like PMS moment where they just kind of freak out or whatever, and that was funny. But now it just seems like Lois is crazy all the time, and some of the stuff she says is very like just like kind of like sexual and gross even, and it's just kind of like, and I don't have a problem with that so much as just I just feel like it's just not in Lois's character, at least like it wasn't, and now they're just making that like kind of what Lois is about largely. And like I said, I do think they've kind of improved upon that recently, but that's kind of my complaint with Lois. I just feel like she's kind of too crazy, and a lot of the stuff she says just isn't what a mom would say. I touch upon Chris a little bit. Let's see, I think Chris has mostly stayed the same. Not much complaint there, but then again, he's not even in the show that much anymore, so that's kind of like whatever. And I think a lot of what he says, I do feel like there might be an element of like what he says is a little bit out of character, as far as like maybe he's like almost too intelligent. Or I feel like they kind of just maybe use him when they feel like, oh, let's like put someone here or whatever. And I don't know. I don't have much complaint about Chris though. Meg, I have a huge problem with what they've done with Meg. Meg was funny before because in the first 3 seasons, or what they did with Meg was funny before. In the first 3 seasons, she was a normal teenage girl to the most part, but kind of bad things would happen to her on the side, or they would neglect her without thinking about it. They would have the best intentions, but they would neglect Meg kind of without thinking about it. Like, oh, I'm going to go up to my room and eat a whole bowl of peanuts. I'm allergic to peanuts. And Peter's like, who was that guy? And like, I mean, that's kind of a stretch, but Peter legitimately was just like, who was that guy? And he wasn't being like a dick to her on purpose. You could tell Peter genuinely thought that was a guy or something, you know, things like that. But now they'll call her a man on purpose, like, oh, you look like a guy, Meg, or they'll shoot her in the face on purpose, like, bam, or whatever, or they'll like punch her, or like, just be like, oh, Meg, I'm sorry, I startled you. And it's just like, she's just the punching bag of the family now. Before she was the punching bag of the show, not the family. Now it's the punching bag of the family. And I just feel like that adds, once again, a dynamic of just non-realism to the show now, because people wouldn't do that to their daughter, and the whole family really cared. Hold on, I'm getting a Skype call. I just feel like it makes the family feel like more shallow and less realistic, because like the whole family kind of cared about each other, you know, before. Like, they all genuinely cared about each other, and it was like a real family. Like even if something bad would happen to Meg, Peter would be like, oh, Meg, I'm sorry, like, you want to talk about this type of thing? And now he's just like, oh, shut up, Meg, I'm sure you're so ugly that it doesn't matter anyways. It's just like, what? Like, it's just not, I don't know, it's just not funny to me. And I think that's even more of an excuse to have a bunch of jokes that don't really rely on the plot line to be funny, and just rely on like Meg bashing, kind of like the Cutaways. So that's another example of how I think the show's gone downhill. I feel like I missed a character, didn't I? Or maybe I didn't. I guess not. I almost forgot to touch upon Peter's character development. This is the biggest one in my opinion, because I think he's kind of the main character. I mean, Family Guy, whatever. But anyways, Peter, he was my favorite character, like, hands down. I just thought Peter was so hilariously funny. But he's just not the same character anymore. Like, he used to be like a kind of a lovable oaf, and now he's just stupid and he acts like a child. And it's not that Peter was the brightest guy before, but he really wasn't that dumb. If you really go back and look at the episodes, like, he had just moments of like irrationality and stuff like that, but he really wasn't like a dumb character, really. Like, he wasn't smart, but he wasn't like hardcore retarded like they're playing him out to be. And I think the first episode where they kind of started to he kind of started to change was actually Petarded, which, once again, I think that's a good episode, but I think that's the first episode they kind of started to a little bit kind of morph his character into something that I just don't like anywhere near as much. And also, Peter is just kind of mean now to people, and he just doesn't think about other people's feelings like he used to, and he just does not treat Lois well at all. There were so many moments in the first 3 seasons where you're like, oh my god, I can really see why Lois and Peter are a couple, and why they, you know, choose to stay together, even though they're still dysfunctional. And there was a sense of realism there. It's like, realistically, I guess, like, Lois is pretty crazy to stay with him even in the old ones, but But still, Peter would do nice things for her a lot. Like, I remember in the episode, I think it was with Death or whatever, with Peter Frampton, where he puts together the scavenger hunt, and he sings that song to Lois or whatever. Like, that was really heartfelt. Just things like that, or he'd, like, make her breakfast in bed. Like, even if it was just cereal or something. Like, something like that. Those are just examples that come into my mind. I think they're both from the same episode. But he also used to be very, very wacky. Like, just a very wacky, cartoony kind of guy, and I feel like they've taken a lot of that away. And also very awkward. Like, I remember, like, oh, found the emergency exit. Oh, found the fire alarm. Like, that kind of thing. But now he's just very, very in-your-face about things. Like for instance, before if he'd say, I'm Peter Griffin, you might say, like, oh, I'm Peter Griffin. How you doing? But now he's like, I'm Peter Griffin! And he's just very, like, in-your-face, and I feel like in-your-face comedy a lot of times fails to be as funny because it's trying to say, oh, look at me, I'm funny. And I think that's a lot of problem with the show now, too, is it just tries so hard to say, oh, look at me, I'm funny now. I've established myself as funny, or whatever. But and I feel like Peter reflects that a lot because he's just, like, so in your face with everything. So those are my main complaints with Peter, and I just feel like they should take some of his awkwardness, or, you know, get his awkwardness back, and like the wackiness about him, the, like, cartoony thing. Like, my all-time favorite moment in an episode is actually when Peter says, trust me, Chris, sometimes it's better not to fit in. And he's dressed as a clown, and he goes, hey, you're all stupid, so they're going to be looking for army guys. I miss that about Peter, when Peter would do just wacky things like that, where you're just like, that's so genius, even it's in, like, the most illogical way. Like, and that's, like, a lot of what I loved about Peter before. I also feel like, before I go off the topic of character development, that even the side characters are just, a lot of times kind of mean to other characters. I just feel like that's a big problem with the show now, is everyone's kind of mean to each other a lot, and I think that like, adds a certain level of stress while watching the show that wasn't there before, and it's less, like, you know, uplifting and heartfelt. I just, for instance, like, the whole, what was it, Brian and Quagmire thing they did recently, where, like, Quagmire just totally hates on Brian and decides he just hates him, and whatever Brian tries to say, Quagmire's just like, no, Brian, you fucked up, type of thing, and it's just like, no one would ever do that. Like, Quagmire wouldn't have done that before, or whatever, and it's just, that's just, like, one example, but there's, like, a lot of little things like that happen, and that's just an extreme example of it, where characters are just mean to each other just for, like, laughs. And I feel like that's a big problem with the show now, is that it relies on shock value to get jokes across, and I just feel like I guess I'll touch upon this now. I also feel like the show relies too much on sexual jokes. Now, I don't have a problem with sexual jokes, whatever, if they're funny, put them in, but when it's like, sexual jokes are very easy to make funny because they get a little bit of shock value out of someone, so it's like you'll say something sexual and someone will be like, oh, I guess that was funny. It's almost like an awkward laugh. So it just feels like the show relies too much on that now, and not just, like, clever humor. And that's something I aim to do, you know, personally in the family animations I do. This isn't really relevant to the topic, and maybe I'm kind of advertising myself, but whatever. I try to be as clean as possible in a sense, because I like to show that you can get those funny jokes across without being just gross and sexual or whatever. And like I said, I have no problem with that kind of humor. If that's the best joke that goes in there, and, like, people decide, okay, that's what's really funny, then it might be for, like, the betterment of the episode to put it in there. Like, go ahead, and I would too if I felt like that it was the best thing to go there. But I'm just saying they rely too much on it now, because it's so easy to make that funny without actually being clever about it. And as far as shock value goes, I also mean there's too much violence now, too. It's just like, and I don't care, like, once again, violence, it doesn't really bother me, but when you put it in there, like, almost every chance you get, it gets a little, and that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but I think you guys get what I mean. But a lot of the cutaways and whatever, there's just all this blood and gore, and it's just like, yeah, that's, like, really funny, but when you think about it, it's, once again, it's a cop-out, and that's what really bothers me about that. Anyways, that's my complaint about the character development. So I guess the last thing I'm going to touch upon, and I feel like it's not as big of an issue as the other things, but it still bothers me because I'm into this kind of thing, and is the animation and the voice acting, I feel like, isn't as good as it was before. Now, some people would say, oh, the characters are very, very, you know, they're much more well-drawn in proportion now, and that is true. But if you look at the old episodes, the characters had much more expression when they talk. They do things like this, or, like, you could see it in their eyes more. Their eyes would move, or like their heads would move more when they talked. And now they just kind of sit in place, and every now and then go like that, or move their head a little bit. And I think some episodes are animated better than others now. But and of course, what you think is good animation is also subjective. But I just think that they had a lot more expression before, and even if they weren't as proportionally drawn, I think that actually added a funny, cartoony aspect to the show that I personally really like. And I feel like they're almost too well drawn. It almost looks like they were done with like CG or something, and they went and like drew over them or something. I don't know. And I just wish that they'd. I think season 3 was probably a good balance between that kind of proportional drawing and like a little bit still had some of that whimsical, wacky type of animation. And I think season 3 was like the best balance, in my opinion. But anyways, that's my complaint about the animation. And the voice acting, I think, has gone downhill too. I don't know, Stewie used to have even more of an accent, and used to kind of talk with almost like a lisp, like, oh, I'm Stewie Griffin, like, how you doing, and whatever. And I think that actually kind of got lost a little bit in season 3, but that's just an example. Stewie's just, I just feel like his voice is very, just kind of, it's still, you know, the voices are still, you know, pretty good. I just feel like Stewie's voice is very, kind of, just like, shallow now, like, kind of, just like, one type of thing, just like, oh, hi, I'm Stewie, how you doing? Instead of like, oh, hi, I'm Stewie, how you doing? Like, I don't know, that's just an example. And I also feel like Peter's voice isn't as good as it used to be. It used to have a lot more, like, muffled to it, kind of like this kind of thing, like, in my opinion. It's kind of like, just awkward muffledness. And now I feel like it kind of reflects, like, the new character he has become. He's just like, I'm Peter Griffin, how you doing? Or whatever. And it almost sounds like he's like a smoker or something. And once again, this is just my opinion, but I just think the voice acting's also gone downhill, and Lois is I think way too nasally now, to the point where it's kind of annoying. And like I said, Brian's voice isn't as deep and doesn't sound as philosophical now, or whatever, how he used to. And these are just tiny things, but all this stuff kind of adds into why I just don't think Family Guy's a good show anymore. And I think it's really sad, and I wish so bad that they would, you know, they would get their act together. I don't know, I at least think the Family Guy episode should be as good as American Dad. American Dad, I think, is a show that holds its own really well. It knows its characters really well. I don't think it's as good as the first 3 seasons of Family Guy were. I think American Dad's a good show. I think the first 3 seasons of Family Guy were amazing, but still, American Dad has stayed consistently good. And I think Family Guy should at least try to stay up to par with American Dad, if nothing else. Just kind of at least like maintain being funny. I mean, it's natural for a show to lose a little bit of its spark as it goes on, but Family Guy just lost it completely, and it's just absurd to me how bad it is now. Yeah, I think that's about it, and I'll wrap this up. Please subscribe and give me 5 thumbs up.